There's a place just west of Anderhall that most players never heard about, but if you stop and look around, you'll see something disturbing. It's a crater, a deep pit in the ground, full of bones. Maybe more than hundreds of human bones, some still in armor and some stripped bare, all tossed together like garbage. There's no plaque, no grave marker, just silence, a few carrion birds, and the wind blowing through the rotten fields of the Western Plaguelands. It's not just decoration. If you look closely, the bodies are stacked. This was done in a rush. This was done to hide something. This is the mass grave near Anderhall, and it's been in the game since vanilla. So, what really happened here? Who were these people? And why did Blizzard put a pile of corpses in the middle of nowhere? The Western Plaguelands used to be green. Long ago, this land was the beating heart of Lord Daeron's farming empire. Rich fields, golden wheat, and cozy villages all across the countryside. The capital city, Anderhall, was known for one thing: grain. It wasn't just a supply town, it was the grain distribution center for the entire kingdom, and that fact would doom it forever. In the years leading up to the Third War, something started to change. A strange illness was spreading, first animals, then humans. And always, it began with food. That's because the Scourge wasn't just using necromancers, they were using bakeries. The Cult of the Damned, led by Kel'Thuzad, had a plan. Instead of charging into battle, they poisoned the grain. Andorhall became the testing ground. Barrels of infected wheat were shipped to towns across the continent, to Brill, Stratholme, and even the capital city. As the infection spread, panic took over. Arthas and Jaina investigated the grain shipments and traced them right back to Anderhall. But by the time they arrived, it was already too late. The town was lost. The streets were empty. Doors hung open. The church was silent. Everyone was either dead or worse. In World of Warcraft Classic, when you ride into Anderhall for the first time, it hits hard. You're not greeted by vendors or guards. You're attacked. Scourge-foot soldiers, skeletal mages, banshees. They flood the streets like they still own the place. The city was reclaimed in Cataclysm as it became part of the main story. The Argent Dawn took controls of it. But if Anderhall was the center of the plague's spread before Cataclysm, then what about the fields outside? That's where things get strange. If you head west toward the farms near Gah'ron's Withering, you'll come across a weird, out-of-place terrain feature. A circular crater covered in bloodstains and bone piles. Open your map. It's literally marked Mass Grave. But that's it. No quests send you there. No NPCs talk about it. There are no voice lines, no books, no journals. Nothing explains who these people were or why they were dumped here. Some players say it's just for flavor. Environmental storytelling. Others think it might have been part of a scrapped quest line or early zone plan. I think this isn't random. This pit sits between Gah'ron's Withering and the Writhing Haunt, two of the most heavily infected farms in the entire Plaguelands. In fact, in some old WoW Classic files, both areas were marked for high plague density, likely as testing zones for early Scourge expansion. So who were they? There are three big theories among the community. 1. Civilians from Gah'ron's farm. These were the last villagers who lived in the area. When the plague reached them, the Cult of the Damned may have dragged their bodies here, infecting them further or storing them for later reanimation. 2. Failed experiments. Kel'Thuzad and his necromancers were experimenting with different strains of the plague. Some bodies were useful and reanimated. Others weren't. The ones that failed may have ended up here. There's a hint in Chronicle Volume 3 where it's mentioned that necromancers in the Plaguelands often had flesh yards for testing rituals and disposal. This could be one of those dump sites. 3. Early resistance fighters. There's a theory that a group of militia or Argent Dawn scouts were ambushed here. They weren't worth turning into ghouls, but also weren't given proper burials, so they were tossed in with the rest. Anyway, they're all just guesses. Blizzard never explained it, which makes the whole thing more interesting to me. If you stand there long enough, the ambient sound shifts. The birds stop. The music fades. You can hear wind blowing, like it's moving through the bones. And there's one final detail. Sometimes, In older versions of the game, the corpses in the mass grave would twitch. Not walk or move, just a slight twitch. Or was that just me? If this kind of stuff sends a chill down your spine too, you might want to stick around. Like and subscribe before someone dumps your character in the mass grave. We've all explored zones that felt off. You walk through Duskwood and expect something spooky, you step into Ajara and wonder why it's so empty. But the mass grave near Andorhal, that one feels different. Because it's not part of a dungeon, it's not a quest zone, it just exists. And Blizzard never gave us any official explanation. Even in the Chronicles books, which explain almost every zone and boss, the mass grave isn't mentioned once. Only hinted at. Well, sort of. Let's talk about the zone itself. Every farm in the Plaguelands is cursed. You've got fields filled with plagued grain, roaming ghouls, and creepy abandoned houses. Gaharon's Withering is probably the worst, just south of the mass grave. The land is gray, the sky looks sick, and everything's frozen in time. And the NPCs in the area don't talk about it either. Even the Argent Dawn hub outside Andorhal never mention it. It's like the mass grave doesn't officially exist, which makes you wonder, what if this wasn't a Scourge site at all? So here's a wild theory that was thrown around in the community years ago. The mass grave isn't filled with plague victims, it's filled with people the Scarlet Crusade killed. Remember, the Scarlet Crusade was created after the fall of Lord Iron. They believed the only way to stop the spread of undeath was to purge anything that could be infected. That included civilians. In Chronicle Volume 3, there's a passage about the Crusade executing unworthy survivors and dumping their bodies outside their fortresses. What if the mass grave was one of those dumping grounds? It would explain why there's no Scourge nearby. It would explain why the corpses were never raised. It might even explain the silence. If you explore the grave carefully, you'll notice it's lower than the surrounding ground, with uneven terrain and carefully placed bone piles. That's not random generation. That's deliberate level design. Someone at Blizzard took the time to shape this pit, to add those bodies, to leave them unnamed, and then they just closed the book. Most people think the horror of Warcraft is in big battles. Arthas slaying his father, the Burning Legion destroying worlds. But sometimes, it's what the camera doesn't focus on. The player who stops in the middle of the road and asks, "Wait, what is this doing here?" That's what the mass grave is. It's the part of Warcraft that feels real. Because war doesn't just leave scars on heroes, it leaves holes in the world. Holes full of people we never knew and never got to save. The next time you pass Andorhal, maybe take a detour. Ride west, dismount, and look around, as you should throughout whole Azeroth. So, if this left you staring at your screen, wondering, what else did I miss in Classic? You're not alone, there's more like this. Dark corners and forgotten stories. Places Blizzard never meant for you to find. So drop a like, hit that subscribe, and maybe we'll dig up the next one together